Okay, we'll go ahead and get started with our program today. Good afternoon and welcome to Passing on the Tradition of Needlearts, a community conversation. My name is Heather Johnson, Senior Manager at Woodlawn and Pope-Leighey House, and we are excited to bring you this program today. The program is being presented by Woodlawn and Pope-Leighey House for our 59th annual Woodlawn Needlework Show, which will be running through tomorrow, March 31st. We will have an online version of this show available starting April 15th for those who are not able to join us in person. Before we begin, I would like to thank everyone for being here and everyone who participated and visited the Needlework Show this year. This year's theme was Common Threads. Needlework has been passed down through families, communities, and generations. Each connection made through needlework is one of those common threads that unite us with other people. Today, we are having a conversation to share what the needle arts and crafting have meant to each of us and who inspired us to begin this journey. We hope that you will speak up to share your own connecting threads as we share ours. To start our conversation, I'd like to share a few of our Woodlawn collection items, which have been on display during the Needlework Show this past month. As you may know, Nellie Custis Lewis, the first owner of Woodlawn Plantation, was a skilled needle artist. She learned her skill from her grandmother, Martha Washington, and both passed their work down through their family. The first item I'd like to share, hold on, is a cushion embroidered by Martha Washington in 1801. As you can see, it has a shell design in beautiful red and yellow. Here's a little bit more detail for you to see. The back of the cushion has a note which reads, "This cushion was worked at Mount Vernon by Mrs. M. Washington in the 70th year of her age. For Lorenzo Lewis, her grandson, left by his mother, E.P. Lewis." Next, we have a bookmark embroidered by Nellie Lewis. It is a silk ribbon mounted with perforated paper. I'll show you a little bit more detail here. It is also accompanied by a handwritten note that reads, "A part of the ribbon worn by Mrs. General Washington on her wedding day. The work, her granddaughter's Mrs. Lewis." Now we have another work by Nellie. This is another bookmark, but this one was done as a gift to a friend. Here you can see the fine detail. Its attached note reads, "A bookmark for Miss Jackson of Philadelphia, a faint tribute from one who has loved and respected her during 60 years. EPL, age 72, July 1857. The final object from the collection we are sharing today is a smoking cap, also worked by Nellie. This is a smoking cap made in 1839. Smoking caps were objects of clothing only worn by men, but were often made by their female family members as gifts. So when Nellie was making this cap, she was likely making it for her husband or her son. If you would like to see the rest of the objects that were on display this month during the Needlework Show, they will be online during the virtual Needlework Show in April. Now we will go to our other special exhibition that was on display this month, Needlework Connections. This exhibition was made up of pieces shared by Nellie's Needlers, our volunteer needlework group here at Woodlawn. Without them, we wouldn't be able to put on the Needlework Show every year. This year, they shared pieces made by their family members in the exhibition, and we will be sharing those stories in a moment. But first, I wanted to start with my own story of stitching through my life. You see a piece here. This piece was a quilt that you see on top with the date of 1941 placed on it. And this was actually my father's baby blanket, made the year he was born. It was made by my great-grandmother Thomas. And then you'll see a blanket behind that. That was actually a blanket that was made for me by my great aunt, my grandmother's sister, when I was born, keeping with the tradition of the original quilt that my great grandmother had made. And I only just recently, because of this exhibition and because of the needlework show and the theme, I only just recently found out who created both of these pieces. And that honestly, my mother had no idea that I had either one of them. My grandmother handed both of them down to me. But I also wanted to just share my own journey. Again, my name is Heather Johnson, and I've been at Woodlawn for about 4.5 years now. And I started stitching in my teens. And in my teens, I never really finished projects I often tried to make for my mom. One in particular I think of is a coupon book, because she was a big coupon clipper. And I remember I had started that project, never finished. I know it's somewhere waiting to be finished. If you're a crafter, from what I've heard, many crafters in needlepoint have many projects going at once. But I will say my mom was a master crafter and seamstress. And truth be told, she had the Midas touch. Anything she made was so well done. I think she inspired me to craft, but honestly, I think I took up crafts that she did not do in order not to compete with that perfection of her work. So while she made Cabbage Patch dolls for me, and she stitched rabbits for me and other kinds of really beautiful pieces, I really focused on doing cross stitch and also dried flower arrangements. To this day, my brother has a saying I cross-stitched for him upon his college graduation that is still in a prominent place in his house, and it makes me recognize that meant quite a bit to him. And I think we'll all recognize in our conversations today how much the pieces mean, that when people put their time, effort, energy, and love into something, how much it means to another person. So with that being said, I wanted to pass on. At this time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass the baton on to our Nelly's Needlers to talk about some of the pieces they had in our exhibition, show them to you, and then hopefully after we've had some conversation from them and from more of our staff, then we will hopefully hear from everyone that's here today. Let's see here. Okay.
Hello, my name is Diane Clark. I'm a lifelong needleworker, a sewist, and also a 5-year member of Nelly's Needlers. And I would like to share with you today this beautiful Tenerife lace doily that was stitched by my great-grandmother, Maria Rosario de Vega. She was a businesswoman, and she did such beautiful work. She would sell them at the market in Guadalajara, Mexico, and people would commission her to make things for their home. My great-grandmother taught my grandmother how to embroider and crochet and other handcrafts. And my grandmother taught my mother and my mother's sister, little sister. My mother in turn taught me and my sister. When my mom was 5 years old, she started her embroidery journey with this beautiful and nicely stitched for a 5-year-old penny square quilt. Penny squares were sold in 5 and dime stores. Some of them were imprinted with colored lines so that the sewer could decide if they wanted to stitch a little brown bear with green grass, or if they wanted to do something in red work. Red work is something that is, has enjoyed a resurgence over the years. This quilt, as I said, was started, the squares were started when my mother was 5. It was completed before she was 12 because at 12 years old, she decided to take all these penny squares and turn them into this quilt. Both of these pieces are now heirlooms in my family and will continue to be for many years to come. I hope you enjoy the rest of the pieces that you'll see today. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Terry Sprackland. I'm a fairly new member of Nellie's Needlers. I joined last year, but I've been attending the Needlework show for 6 or 7 years. It's a magnificent tribute to both the house and the handicraft. I wanted to share with you basically what is my most cherished possession, and that is this hand-embroidered rose quilt that my grandmother made for me. And it was actually the last thing she did before she passed away. So she was born in the 1890s in Kansas, and she was first a farm wife, and then she moved into the bustling metropolis of Chapman, Kansas, where there's like 2 streets. You know, there's walk and don't walk if you want to. My husband is from New York City, and the first time he visited with me, he walked behind the buildings because he thought it was some kind of Hollywood set, he was sure. But Grandma became known in town for her gifts. She made sock monkeys for a lot of the children in town. She made clothes, like I still have some of the baby clothes that she made for me. And as I was growing up, she quilted, she did a needlepoint, and there's a cross stitch of hers on exhibition here. And so it was not really so much that she taught me how to embroider as it was that she encouraged me and gave me a model to aim for, basically. Because I actually learned to embroider in grade school in a girls' school in France, where they considered that one of the essential things you learned when you were in 4th grade. So I prefer embroidery, that's my favorite. And as you can see, as it's just so well done that it has a feeling for me of you know, you just keep on doing what you can and taking care of people and your family and trying to be the best person you can be. So she finished the embroidery a matter of days before she had the fatal stroke, and then my aunt brought it to her church quilting guild. So Della Williams Norman is commemorated by all the people who in her church guild who helped quilt this as well. So keep your family mementos and try also to tell the stories about them, because I have a few things that I'm not sure how far back they go or exactly when, but as a Kansas frontier family, it could be back to before the Civil War. So I've also seen people write notes and like pin them to things. So I encourage people to consider the stories as well as the objects. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Paula Davis, and I have been a Nellie for 4 years. And I started stitching at a very young age. My mom taught me, and I can remember when I was a little girl, I was in elementary school, and she worked during the day, but in the evenings, she would always have a project going. And she was a really great stitcher. She did embroidery, she did crocheting, she did anything. She sewed, I mean, just everything. And she taught me everything she knew. So it was really interesting because she used to sit on the couch and always had a project going. And I loved to sit next to her and just watch, you know, what she was doing, and found it fascinating. And soon I was doing my own projects right next to her. And the weird thing about it is she's right-handed and I am left-handed, but we figured it out because all of those things I do left-handed. So, but today what I'm going to share is something that I remember has been in my family ever since I can remember. And I have quilt blocks today. And these quilt blocks, they're from a baby quilt that was made for my dad. And they were made by my great-grandmother. And they're all hand stitched. And I have the pattern is actually, we called it Farmer Sam, but I also believe it's called Overall Sam. And I like it because I think it's one of those patterns that most people will recognize when they see it. And I have 3 blocks. And so that's kind of nice. Now there's also a counterpart to Farmer Sam, and that is Sunbonnet Sue. And according to my dad, my aunt got the Sunbonnet Sue quilt. So, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them, but I think I may make them, maybe sew the 3 of them together. Here's my 3rd one. And I may sew the 3 of them together and make it into a wall hanging, or perhaps a bureau scarf, possibly even maybe 3 little pillows, perhaps connecting my stitching with my great-grandma's stitching. And the reason why I don't have the full quilt is because when my dad passed away, my mom, who was always fair to all 4 of her daughters, decided that she would cut the quilt up into quilt blocks. And the 4 of us each got 3 blocks. So when I look at this, you know, I think that it is a connection to my great-grandma, also to my dad, and also my mom, but I'm still connected to my 3 sisters as well. So, and maybe someday when I do put this together in a project, you know, we'll have the connection of the stitching from both generations. So that's it.
Hi, my name is Chris Lozier. I've been a Nellie for about 1.5 to 2 years. My mother taught me to knit when I was about 8 or 9 years old. She was right-handed, and she made it clear to me, her left-handed daughter, that she would not learn how to knit left-handed so that she could teach me a left-handed method. So I did learn how to knit right-handed. And to this day, I knit right-handed. But that ability did not carry over to crochet, which I was never able to conquer, despite many attempts by my grandmother to teach me. I do stitch left-handed because I taught myself. I would like to share with you my journey to the enjoyment of stitching hardanger embroidery. In the 1980s, our extended family would gather in our hometown of Vermillion, South Dakota, to celebrate our grandmother's birthday. An ad was put in the local paper inviting everyone to a reception at the Lutheran church. And if we didn't have at least 125 people in attendance, we felt that we had failed Grandma. Grandma was never failed. We did this for Grandma's 85th, 90th, and 95th birthday. And after that, we did it annually until she died at age 107. After having attained her goal of being the oldest woman in South Dakota. My Aunt Evelyn was the force behind Grandma's birthday parties. One year I arrived in Vermillion to find Evelyn hard at work making gifts for the ladies who ran the kitchen for Grandma's party that year. She showed me a lovely skill she had learned about and basically taught herself, called hardanger. The gifts she was making for all 10 of her friends in the kitchen were hardanger bookmarks. She explained the clusters, the wrapping, and yes, the cutting of the fabric. Yikes. Can you imagine cutting the fabric in the middle of a project? I loved the look of her work and was so excited to try it myself. When I returned home to Virginia, I looked in the yellow pages, that's how long ago it was, and found a little shop in the Mount Vernon area called Crossed Canoes that focused on hardanger embroidery, carried all kinds of supplies for it, and held classes. I attended a class and produced a piece that I entered in this year's Woodlawn Needlework show that earned an honorable mention. After that, Evelyn and I would share patterns, threads, and had a few hours spent stitching whenever I went home. 2 homes, Virginia and South Dakota. I received a couple of Aunt Evelyn's framed pieces after she died in 2017, a few months before her 100th birthday. It's so wonderful to admire her work and be inspired by her love of family and needlework every time. And this is her creation that I share with you today. I think you can see that pretty well. Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Laura Fogg, and I've been a Nellie for about 3 years. My first encounter with needlework was knitting in the 3rd grade when the nuns decided that some of us should learn how to knit because I guess they were trying to calm us down or something. We actually knit during school. It was quite a bit of fun. So I took home this rather pathetic earband, headband, hat that they were teaching us to make. And I showed it to my mother, and my mother said, "Oh, I can help you with that." I had no idea that my mother knew how to knit, because at this point I was the eldest of 6 children. When I was in 3rd grade, there would be 3 more coming along later. Well, I like to think that I helped my mother pick up the needles again, because she began to knit more things. And as we grew up through the years, a couple of my sisters also learned to knit, and we made sweaters and did some other interesting things. My mother also began, and I don't know exactly when she started, but she loved to do needlepoint. And as a result, all 26 of her grandchildren have needlepointed Christmas stockings, which is something that is a nice thing that runs through our family. My sisters also, I have 4 sisters, they also all have done needlepoint at one point or another. And a couple of my sisters had jobs where they had to spend time in hotels and time alone, and they did some absolutely beautiful work. Some of them were quite large. One thing that means a lot to me is a gift that was given to me by my sister, Patricia Folk-Kapitke, and it's a backgammon board. I was in the Navy, and while I was in the Navy, at one point I started playing backgammon, and I shared with them that I enjoyed playing backgammon. And my sister gave this to me for Christmas one year. This has been in a number of different duty stations with me, up and down the East Coast, and it traveled with us to Italy when my husband and I moved to Italy. And so anyway, this is something that's very precious to me. It hung on I actually have a hanger on the back of it. It's hung on our wall in probably 10 homes that we've lived in. And it's gotten quite a lot of play here and there around the world. So it's been great sharing this with you. And I always think of my sister Pat when I see this. I love it a lot. It's been great to be with you.
Hello, my name is Mary Andrews. I have been a Nellie for 7 years, but I've been involved with the Needlework show since the bicentennial in 1976, which then got me interested in being a school tour docent, and I was a volunteer gardener and did a lot of the gardening here at Woodlawn, and have been with Woodlawn a good long time. And finally they said, come on, Mary, you might as well join Nellie's Needlers. You already do everything that Nellie's Needlers do. So I did. I have brought a little picture that my grandmother did for my mother as a housewarming gift when she was first married. I wanted to show it to you because I wanted you to see that not everything is a magnum opus. This is a little commercial kit that was available in the 1930s. My parents bought their house in 1927, so it was probably done shortly thereafter. And to me, it represents all the things that my grandmother taught me to do. She could do anything. She made quilts. She cross-stitched huge tablecloths. She did all kinds, knitted baby blankets for every grandchild in the family. Now I've taken up the responsibility after my mother gave it to me, and I'm knitting blankets for my grandmother's great, great, great grandchildren. It's amazing that in living memory, I'm carrying on something that my grandmother did to her great, great, great grandchildren. She taught me how to do embroidery during the summers when, I suppose I was about 10. I'd be sitting over in a corner working on the project she'd given me to do. I was hemming dust cloths. We don't even use dust cloths now, but I would do a hem all the way around all four sides using chain stitch, buttonhole stitch. The next dust cloth might be feather stitch. And by the time I'd gotten around all four sides, I pretty well mastered each one of those stitches. One thing that was a big advantage to it was, while I was sitting over there in the corner working on my embroidery, my mother and my grandmother and my aunt, her sisters, would forget that I was there. And I learned all kinds of things about the family that my brothers never knew, because they'd talk away without even thinking about the fact that I was there in the room. So it's just that this has always been hanging on the wall in my room as I grew up. And it still is. And it just means a lot to me. It encouraged me to continue with my needlework. And when I grew up, I took classes in needlepoint. And this is a pillow that I made for my daughter when she was 7 years old. It's held up pretty well for being in a child's room all those years. I hope that it will encourage her to continue with her needlework. She won ribbons in the Needlework show long before I did. So keep on stitching. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Deb Kemper, and I have the honor and privilege, along with Diane, who you met earlier, of being one of the co-chairs of the Needlework show. So we're very thrilled that you joined us today to see a little bit about, to see a little bit about what we hold so dear and what we put into the show. I've been a Nellie's Needler for 25 years, and I've really been involved with the show. It's been very special to me. I feel it's something that's worth cherishing and passing on to other generations, and it has meant a lot to me as I've seen my own family grow and learn things. All 4 of my children and 2 of my grandchildren have come to the needlework classes that we hold here every summer, and they've really enjoyed those programs. I started stitching when I was maybe 5. I had the distinction in my class at school of always being the last kid to get whatever childhood disease was going around. So if there was chicken pox, I got it probably on the last day of school. I'd be healthy as a horse all the way through, and then the last day of school, I'd come down with whatever it was. So I would show up on my grandmother's doorstep in their farm in South Dakota, sick, which meant that I couldn't go around and visit all of my cousins and do those other kinds of things that my sisters had a chance to do. So my grandmother had to find something to do to keep me occupied and out of her hair. She was a farm wife and she was very busy. In those days, at least, a farm in South Dakota, you commonly had 4 meals a day. You had breakfast in the morning, then you had dinner at noon, lunch at about 4 in the afternoon, and then supper was before everybody turned in for the night. It might be at 8 o'clock, but she was cooking or repairing or fixing or doing something all day long. And so she didn't have time to spend babysitting a sick child. So she would give me something to do, little scraps of fabric, and she'd show me a quick little stitch and then she'd be off to do something else. Or she'd show me how to knit a couple stitches and then she'd be off to do something else. The only exception to that was during her story. Every day, the edge of night would come on and Grandma would sit there, and I swear she never looked at her knitting, but she would be furiously knitting and paying attention to her story. And then immediately after the show was over, she'd call her friend and then they would talk about what had happened on the show that day. So that was always kind of fun to watch. So that's how I learned to do a lot of different things, and I enjoy many different types of needlework. One of the things that I've participated in that has been particularly meaningful to me was when my oldest daughter got married about 6 years ago. They had the reception here at Woodlawn out on the lawn, and it was a beautiful, beautiful day in May. And I knew I wanted to do something to express how delighted I was for her wedding in needlework, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So when she had picked out her dress, I looked at the dress, and the stitching was already done on the dress, so I didn't need to do anything there, but I did take a peek underneath, and there were 7 panels on the inner slip of the dress. And so I came up with the idea that I would stitch her name in the dress. And so I did. And then because there were 7 panels, this is going to be a little fiddly here, so excuse me. So she was born in 1985. And so, in September, so her birth month flower is the morning glory. So I stitched that in there. And then I went back to her mother, me, and I stitched in my birth month flower, the lily of the valley. And then I went back to my mother, who was born in December, and stitched that in. And then back to her mother, Edna, who was born in November. So she had, I think, her chrysanthemums. So I had to find out what the flowers were, and try to figure out a little pattern that I could stitch into them. And then her mother, my great-grandmother, who I learned to crochet from, and she was born in April, I think. So those are supposed to be little daisies. Thank you. And then we went back to her mother, who I had not met, but she was also born in December. She was a Maria. So I put holly in for her. And then, surprise to me, because I didn't know this, when I started out with this project, her mother was another Anne. So she had sweet peas for her flower there. So we went back 7 generations to 1856 for this. Now, the rest of the story, I've been telling this to a few people who have visited here. I said, because stitchers, of course, we never procrastinate, right? We never put off anything to the last minute. So it was 2 days before the wedding, and I am furiously trying to stitch to get this done in time. And my daughter calls me and says, Mom, are you coming home? We have things to do. oh, I told her, I'll be home in a little while. I'm over at my friend's house and I'll be home in a couple hours. And she said, don't you suppose you could stitch with your Nellie friends later? My wedding is in 2 days. So all was forgiven. However, when she saw the dress, she was very moved. She had to go around and show everybody the underside of her dress during the wedding. So that was kind of fun. Everybody seemed to enjoy it. And it's been a real treat to see that she enjoyed it so much. And now we have another family heirloom to share with people. I was going to show you again on here, Alma, my great-grandmother, the one who taught me to crochet. I have a special heirloom from her, and it's particularly special to me because when my mother was expecting me, she was in her grandmother's house and went up into the attic and found a box, and she opened it up and found inside it the dress that my great-grandmother was baptized in. So in 36 on there. So this was that gown that she was baptized in. So my great-grandmother was baptized in this, and then it skipped 2 generations, and then it went to me. So Grandma Widman gave it to me to be baptized in, and then my mother used it for my 4 younger sisters, and then all of my cousins were baptized in it, and all of my children and my grandchildren have been baptized in it as well, because many of us have been in the military. It has gone around the world a couple times. It's a little worse for the wear at the moment. There's a few little places where babies were a little bit rough with it because it's quite old, but it's really special. And there is a slip underneath this one that is every bit as beautiful as the dress on top. It's all hand made eyelet embroidery on there. And just like Heather was talking about how the stories, as you talk with people and you find out the stories about your pieces and about your family, we're still learning about things. My sister came to see the show last week, and she told me, and I'd never known this before, that there was an identical dress to this, because what I didn't know was that my great-grandmother was a twin, and that twin did not survive past a few weeks into her infancy, and she was buried in a twin to this dress. So it's even more precious, I guess, to me now that it's something that we can see and enjoy and share, but it's fascinating to me about how some of these stories never get told unless you have an opportunity or an object of something tangible like a piece of needlework that helps you share those stories and pass it on. So thank you again so much for participating today. And I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica McAvoy. I am the program assistant for events here at Woodlawn and Pope-Leighey. I have been here about a month, so if you've been to any of our other programs, I've been kind of the face behind the camera while we've been doing these things. And I absolutely love needlework. I've only just been doing it for a little while myself, but it does go back for quite a few generations in my family. My great-grandmother taught my grandmother, my babci, which is Polish for grandmother. My babci taught my mom, and then they both tried to teach me. We started with crochet. I was about 10 when my grandmother tried to teach me. It didn't work out very well. But as she got older, my mom and my grandmother started to do it a little bit more. My mom has always said that she is not a very crafty person, that she's not a very creative person. But she learned that a couple of years ago, I started to knit and crochet. I decided that I wanted to pick up some of the things that my babci had taught me. And that inspired her to start doing it again as well. And when I started working in museums, I noticed there were a lot of people who did embroidery and other kinds of needlework. So that was when I started to pick up embroidery, and that happened to be right around the time of the beginning of the pandemic. Pardon me, it's spring. And so throughout the pandemic, I've been practicing my embroidery. And while I can't say it's good enough to share at the Needlework show quite yet, we'll hope for next year. So my mother has all of my babci's pieces and a lot of the pieces that were done by my great aunt Helen, my great aunt Angie. But I was given this quilt when I graduated from my undergrad program by my father's cousin, Jen. And so it is one of the greatest gifts I was ever given. I absolutely adore having it. It's so lovely and soft, and I want to take care of it for years and years to come, and hopefully one day pass it down to the later generations in my family. And now that I've shared my story, I just want to mention that we had a board outside in our needlework show called Share Your Story that people have been writing their own notes and their own stories on for the past month while we've been having the needlework show. I just wanted to share a couple of those. So this one comes from a person named JB Senior. Says, I started needlepoint when I was in India. A Greek woman taught me, and I've loved it ever since. Over the past couple of years, I've made many pillows and other projects. I find needlepoint quite relaxing, and I plan to continue it for the rest of my life. Let's see here. An anonymous person said, my mother and grandmother were leaders in the Montgomery County Fair in Maryland, and I spent every summer at the fair learning to crochet, cross stitch, and braid rugs. It was like having 100 favorite aunts sharing their skills with me. All my favorite childhood memories are from that fair. And then let's see, the last one is from a woman named Anne. Says, my mom taught me the basic cross stitch at 10 years old. When I was 14 years old, I stitched the Lord's Prayer on a 16 by 20. I still have it, and I'm 70 years old. I also have a piece that my mom, Geraldine Ruth, did when she was 8. It says, warm friendship, like the setting sun, sheds kind light on everyone. We carved it on her tombstone. So those were just some of my favorite pieces that people shared with us. But now I think we'd like to open up the conversation to everybody in our audience. Isn't that right, Heather?
Yes. Yes, so if you have anything you would like to share, we would love to hear from you about the stories of how needlework has influenced you or any kind of crafting experience. I also just want to thank all of the Nellie's Needlers and staff who shared their pieces and stories today. Is there anyone that would like to share their stories?
Anyone can speak up or start sharing their video or their from their mic if they'd like. Or you can put your story in the chat section to the side if you want to.
Just have to unmute yourself, which is on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. We have one comment here. Said, I'm so glad these ladies have shared something so personal and very beautiful. I'm also amazed at the talents displayed and grateful these arts are continued to be taught and learned by others. Anyone else that's interested in sharing? We do have more quotes from our quote board.
Oh, yes, certainly. So let's see here. Oh, this one was fun. So from Annie Odette, my great aunt Hazel tried to teach me to knit and do needlework when I was 5. It did not take. But when I moved to a new city as a new bride, I started to do needlework of all sorts. I figure Aunt Hazel's influence finally took, which I personally agree with. That is exactly what happened with me and my bocce.
It looks like Jill has a piece to show.
So this piece, which is this big, was designed by Elsa Williams for my mother, and those in the embroidery world know who Elsa is. I don't know if I can get it any closer for you to see some of it, but there's not another piece out there like this. I grew up knowing one of the foremost embroiderers as my mother's friend. So it's a different world. And so this was one of the last pieces she stitched before she died a long time ago. I think it says there's like 300 hours in it.
It's beautiful.
So it's very different, and people don't think she designed it because of how different it is, but it was what my mother wanted, and she did it for her as a friend. So I have a unique piece of embroidery.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I love the color choices.
It's all green. And last year I found a piece that had been stitched by my mother. It was a tree of life, and it was this tall, and it was about 5 by 3, and my in-laws had put it in their attic, and I tried to clean it, and it was not good. So I'm glad I still have something from her that was not. I have moved and had 21 times and have had things disappear. And so I'm glad that this did not have a choice. It was moved ahead of time. So there, I've learned. But I still stitch, and I'm stitching while we're talking.
What piece are you working on right now?
I'm working on a sampler for the Royal School of Needlework. I have a class at 5 o'clock on Friday morning.
Terrific.
Oh, wow.
No, barely awake for it.
Are you here local near Alexandria, or are you farther away?
I am in Leonardtown. I have had pieces in the show.
Oh, terrific. Well, next
I
year
did.
is our 60th anniversary, so it'll be a great year to enter.
Yeah. I had the pocketbook that was in last year's show. The silk ribbon.
Yes.
And I did the crab.
Oh, beautiful.
I don't know if you remember the crab. It was in a crate.
Yes.
It's in a crab cage that was made out of needle lace.
I do.
The Nellies certainly remember.
Yes.
They're all nodding at me.
Does anyone else have pieces to share, or
Even if you don't have a piece with you, you can share a story if you have a connection you want to share. And I know Jill was saying that she's stitching as we speak. I know I can see at least one in the room stitching during the rest of the event. Oh, pretty.
Creative work.
Yep. We do also have our executive director, Sean Halifax, is on this call, and I don't know if he wants to share any of his family stories.
Sure, I will. So if you had the opportunity to come to the show, you'll know that I highlighted my grandmother in the letter that I wrote welcoming everyone to the show. Her name is Alma Charles, and she was born in 1915 and passed away several years ago. But one of my fondest memories as a child was every year she would knit booties for all of her grandchildren, of which there was almost 24. And one of the things that you always knew is that when Christmas came, you might get a note from her letting you know that your booties were coming, but they might not be ready until February or March, because she was knitting everybody these booties. In the letter that I wrote that's in the program, I also mentioned that she tried to teach me how to do various needle art, including knitting and other things, and I never really took to it. But that time that I spent with her was just so valuable, and just developed a relationship with her like no one else I've ever had before. So when we were preparing for the show, I asked my mom if she had anything that her grandmother or that her mother, Alma, had ever made that was dear to her. And so she did share with me, and I brought with me today an apron that my grandmother made for my mom, which is, I don't know anything about it. I know that she sewed it. In fact, she sewed all of her clothing, but she did all of the needlework on this and sewed it. And so this is something that my mom used to wear, but she's kind of outgrown it, so she doesn't wear it anymore. And it's kept in a special place at her house. And so I wanted to thank her for letting me bring this today to share with you all. But my grandmother has passed away, and she's left just this incredible amount of work that she's done. You know, you all were talking about learning something new. When my grandmother was in her 90s, she decided that she wanted to learn how to do tatting. And so she started learning how to do that when she was in her 90s, which is pretty amazing, that she was still working. I think that's what gave her such long life, was the work that she was doing with this. And everything that she did, except for the clothing she made for herself, she was giving away to friends and family.
Thanks, Sean, for sharing. Anyone else have any stories to share?
Right.
Okay.
All right, so I do have a couple more stories from our Share Your Story wall that I'll share before we end for today. So let's see here. This one is from M. It says, my mom taught me to cross stitch just as I hit my teenage years and needed to teach myself the importance of quiet time and patience. Now I watch her teaching her grandkids, and it gives me some peace of mind that my kids and nephews will learn the same skills and life lessons, which I assume means getting some more peace and quiet. And then we have two more anonymous. It says, Annie and Dorothy, my grandma and mom, taught me on the Navajo reservation. My family homeschools, and now I'm teaching my 5 children. And our final one is, I have my father's baby blanket that my great-grandmother Thomas hand-stitched. My grandmother passed it down to me along with a blanket my great-aunt Mary stitched for me in a similar fashion. They are precious to me. And then it looks like we have a comment from Kelly in the comments. It says, I am not at home right now, but my mother was an artist. The College of Drew University. Says she could do cross stitch, needlepoint, knit. I do have some of her pictures that she petite point painted, and even some pocketbooks, and I've cherished them. I use them and enjoy them. And, you know, like I said, it wasn't just my grandmother, my great aunts also did these things, and it's making me think of that my great aunt Angie stitched a traditional Polish dress, and it was Sean's story that reminded me of his grandmother stitching her clothes. My great aunt Angie stitched a traditional Polish dress, and it got passed around between the grandkids and grand nieces while we were very young. So we all have pictures of us in this outfit that my great aunt stitched. Yeah, that was just one last story. So I
Okay.
hand it over to Heather to bring us out.
Perfect. Thanks to everyone who shared today and for attending the show. A special thank you to the Nellies Needlers and everyone who shared their stories today. If you'd like more information about upcoming programs and events here at Woodlawn and Pope-Leighey, you can sign up for email updates on our website. As I mentioned earlier, we will have a virtual version of the Needlework show available starting April 15th. Thank you again for anyone who's donated, and if you haven't yet, please consider it. It helps us to be able to run programs such as these. In about a half hour, you should receive an email with a link for donations and a survey about the program. It should only take about 2 minutes to complete. Please take the time to fill out the survey so that we can make our programs even better. Thank you again for coming today and have a good afternoon.